Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. My name is James Evelegh and I'm the editor of In Publishing. Our guest this time is Marcus Fares, founder and editor-in-chief of Dezeen, the successful architecture, interiors and design website, which was acquired in March by the Danish media group JP Politikens. Marcus tells us about his early ambitions for the site when he launched it as a simple blog in 2006.
I do remember saying to myself, I don't know what's going to happen and I don't know how big it could be or whatever, but I did feel like I could build a global architecture and design media brand on the internet.
How a chance encounter with a celebrity A-lister gave him his first big break.
And I got invited to a garden party and met Kanye West. He was hobnobbing with the design crowd. And so I went up to him and asked him what he was doing there. And he told me that he loved design and that he was getting his apartment in Manhattan done. And I persuaded his publicist to send me the first ever images of Kanye West's Manhattan apartment, which caused a viral sensation. It was the first time that Dezeen kind of broke out of the little world of my connections.
And his approach to new product development.
Our route has always been ideas driven. I mean, maybe too many ideas. We like to try things out. We like to build things to see what happens. Our business model is like based on the MVP model, the minimum viable products. Like we think we can launch a recruitment business. How cheaply can we get something up that will establish whether it's possible or not?
Amongst many other things. But first, a quick word about our valued sponsors. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Advantage CS, a leading global provider of subscription and membership management software. Capabilities include marketing, sales, payments, and customer relationship software for publishers, membership associations, and information providers. For more information, go to advantagecs.com. Marcus Fares is founder and editor-in-chief of the online architecture, interiors and design site Dezeen, a brand he launched from his bedroom in 2006. Since then, it has enjoyed considerable growth and won loads of awards. In 2017, Marcus became the first digital journalist to be awarded an honorary fellowship at the Royal Institute of British Architects for the enormous contribution he has made to architecture. Marcus, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you very much. Hi there.
Now, I believe Dezeen, well, as just said, started in 2006 as a blog from your bedroom. So kind of winding the clock back 15 years, what was the thinking at the time and your ambition?
Well, what happened was I'd been editing a print magazine called Icon, an architecture and design magazine, for about 2.5 years. And I got fired from my job. So I had to find something else to do. And around about that time, I'd noticed as a journalist that the internet was becoming a really valuable source of information. There weren't many sites about architecture and design that were very good. So I'd already had in my head the idea that maybe the internet could be a good platform to launch a magazine. I'd always wanted to be my own boss. I'd always wanted to launch my own publication. And getting fired was the push I needed to propel me into setting up my own thing. So I set up a blog. I got a friend to help me install the WordPress installation. I spent $20 in total. That was my total upfront investment. $10 on the hosting package, $10 on the domain name, and I just started playing around with it. I allowed myself initially to spend an hour a day on it. The rest of the time was dedicated to trying to make a living. I had 2 young children at the time. But it started to take off really quickly, actually. People just found out about it. And to answer your question about the ambitions for it, I do remember saying to myself, I don't know what's going to happen and I don't know how big it could be or whatever, but I did feel like I could build a global architecture and design media brand on the internet. And I did feel that I could do that more quickly than in print, which had obviously been the other way of launching your own magazine, was to launch a print magazine. I didn't have the money for that, and I didn't have the patience for that either.
And do you think if you hadn't been fired, that stroke of luck, as it now appears, you would have would Dezeen have never have happened?
I think it's very likely. Uh, I had the idea. I had the idea for the name. I had the idea for how it would work. But it's very easy to just stay in your job, isn't it? No matter how miserable
Mm.
you are or whatever. One thing I definitely didn't want to do was I didn't want to then go and edit another magazine for someone else and then edit another magazine for someone else and find myself sort of in my mid-50s just wondering who was going to be my next boss and what project I was going to be given. I wanted to be in control of my own destiny. So, and also, to be honest, I'm not the easiest employee. So it was
So
probably
that
going
was
to,
the only route open to you.
well, it was probably going to end in tears one way or the other sooner or later. And the great thing about it, fortunately, I got fired at a time where you could start a simple blog with no investment and build it into something. You know, in hindsight, my timing was impeccable. Or my my agitated bosses was timing was impeccable.
Well, thank you to them, I suppose. And you mentioned the name Dezeen. Where did that come from? You obviously had the idea.
Yeah, so I'd been looking for a domain name that kind of did what it said on the tin. So I was looking for combinations of design and magazine. All the obvious ones had gone. I thought that people would get that, zine is a shortened form of magazine. De is design magazine. I thought everyone would find that really obvious, but to this day, people are really surprised when I explain it to them. For a long time, I was getting emails addressed to Mr. Dezeen. I think people assumed I was a
All
sort of
right.
South African or a Dutchman behind this website.
And do people who don't know Dezeen well, do they assume it's a print magazine? Do they assume when you call yourself a magazine that it has to be print?
We still do get emails from people saying, "Can you send me your print copy?" Or what kind of resolution images should we send for the print
Okay.
version? That perhaps is because of us calling it a magazine, but I called it a magazine from the outset because in 2006 the word blog already had loaded connotations, and lots of bloggers were kind of people who weren't professional writers, who were a bit ranty, who were using their blogs to kind of vent their personal vendettas. And I wanted Dezeen to be professional and kind of neutral platform. I wanted to distance myself from the kind of world of blogging. So I called it a magazine to make it sound more, more kind of important and I suppose conservative in a way.
Excellent. And since then, the site has grown hugely and now attracts, I think, 3 million unique visitors a month.
Yeah, more than, yeah.
Oh, wow. So what's the figure now?
It depends on the time of year, but actually, this period, March and April, is usually our most busiest period of the year, and we easily get like 3.5 million unique visitors in in March and April, and then of course it's sort of Christmas. December is usually a bit more of a doldrums month
Hmm.
because of Christmas.
Hmm. So if you look back 15 years and you trace the route from then to now, what have been the key milestones along the way? You obviously started as a very small. I'll say the word blog one more time, but that's what you started as, and now you're a large site. What were the key milestones?
Yeah, well, I don't mind calling it a blog now because because it's based on WordPress and we've kept that very simple blog structure of basically reverse chronological publishing. It's a stack of stories, basically. It's a feed. Um, Key milestones were my first viral story was a key milestone, and which led to the first time we had, I think, more than 1,000 visitors in the same day, which at the time felt absolutely extraordinary. That was another stroke of luck. I'd within a couple of weeks of setting up Dezeen, I'd flown out to Miami because there's a big design fair out there called Design Miami, and I kind of made it my mission to introduce myself to the people that ran that fair and get to know all of the people on the scene out there and pick up some stories. And I got invited to a garden party. I met Kanye West. He was hobnobbing with the design crowd, and so I went up to him and asked him what he was doing there. And he told me that he loved design and that he was getting his apartment in Manhattan done. And I persuaded his publicist to send me the first ever images of Kanye West's Manhattan apartment, which caused a viral sensation. It it was the first time that Dezeen kind of broke out of the little the little world of my connections, because I never did any marketing. I never bought any ads or anything like that. It was literally word of mouth. But that was the first story that propelled it beyond the kind of smallish design cognoscenti world.
And is that the secret of a viral story, getting someone like Kanye West involved?
No, there's all kinds of, well, I wish I knew the secret to a viral story, but there's all kinds of different reasons why stories go viral. But that was the first time it had happened for me and Dezeen. I mean, basically what happened was the American hip hop community picked up on it. So we suddenly had this kind of culture clash of all these people who are into hip hop coming onto Dezeen, trying to figure out these weird architectural renderings and posting comments asking where the toilet was, and how the hell could you cook an omelette in that kitchen and things like that, which was really, really hilarious. But I didn't care. It was eyeballs and it was buzz and it was great.
And the next milestones after that?
Well, I suppose around about the same time, I got the first people inquiring about advertising or paid collaborations. So I launched Dezeen on the 17th of November 2006, and the Kanye West story, I published it the following January, so within 2 months. And around about that same time, people started to get in touch and saying, "Oh, can we advertise on your site? Oh, you've got a blog." I picked up a couple of commissions from cultural institutions to run blogs for them. So that was when it started to look like I could turn it into a business. I'd gone into it thinking, I'm sure there's a business model in here somewhere, but didn't have any idea what that might be. But people started to come forward and offer cash, basically, to do collaborations or straightforward advertising. And people started to ask about video. So I bought a video camera and became a videographer without any training. So that was probably that was a key moment as well, when it became obvious that there was a business model in this somehow.
And at what point did you branch out from being a one-man band and start taking on people?
Probably after about 4 or 5 months, people started to write in saying, "Can I be your intern, or can I have a job?" which was great. So I had a series of interns who initially would come to our house. They'd knock on the door when my wife was breastfeeding or I'd be changing nappies. We have these hip youngsters coming in and sort of sitting down at a makeshift desk with a sort of borrowed laptop, or they'd bring their own, I think, in the early days. And then
that didn't put them off?
No, it was great. It was really exciting. I mean, actually, the first intern I had is now like a fairly successful curator in Switzerland. She sort of runs a museum. My first employee, my first employee, Rose, started out as an intern, and she was so good that I offered her a job, and that was, I think, within like 8 or 9 months of starting. She's now sort of very high-powered exec in the digital world. And then I started to get travel opportunities, which didn't go down very well domestically, obviously. So I came up with the idea of my wife, for her to come into partnership with me. She had a background in television production. So we thought, well, why don't we run this together? Because then we don't have to answer to anyone. We can be totally flexible about our diaries and travel and things like that. So my wife became my business partner, I think, after a year or so. And then I think after 14 or 15 months, we got our first shared office. And then we were almost a company by that point.
Excellent. Well, very exciting. Obviously a perfect team.
Yeah, and it's kind of grown ever since then. So, we now have just under 30 members of staff and a proper office now, rather than a sort of a shared one. We were in a former doctor's surgery for a few years in Stoke Newington. I myself knocked down all the internal walls in this weird doctor's surgery and turned it into an office. So we've really worked from the ground up. It's really been a story of building something from literally nothing.
Yeah, I suppose the joys of a startup, when you have to do literally everything, making tea and knocking walls down.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you've said that to quote, "We want Dezeen to forever be a bastion of independent journalism, a champion of architecture and design, and a force for good in the world." What did you mean by being a force for good in the kind of publishing context?
Well, I'm a journalist through and through. Even though I studied design, the thing that I discovered that I was good at whilst I was studying design actually was writing about architecture and design. I kind of understood it, and I could communicate ideas, and much better than I could actually design. I was a hopeless designer, and
That's very honest.
but I was quite a late starter, so I didn't know what I wanted to do. I travelled and I worked in bars and shops and all that kind of thing, and then lived in Spain for a while, and then came back when I was approaching 30, thinking I really need to get a career under my belt. So I did a postgraduate journalism course at London College of Printing, as it was then, and found that I was really good at news journalism. I had absolutely no idea. I just loved it, and I could do it really, really easily, and fell in love with the idea of journalism, and really became that became my trade, and always felt that journalism was an undervalued profession, that it was important, and with Dezeen, I really wanted it to be the best quality wise in the field. That it's very easy or it was very easy in those days to set up a blog and not have any quality or any integrity or any values. But Dezeen always had those values. We weren't always able to live up to them because we were so short staffed and living on a shoestring. But it really felt important to me that our stories were accurate, that if we made a mistake, we corrected them, and that we had some kind of agenda's not the quite word, but some kind of like moral compass that helped us take the industry in a direction that we felt was a way it should be going, particularly in terms of things like diversity, particularly in terms of things like climate change and pollution and things like that, to not lecture people on what to do, but to by curating the sites in a certain way, we could help lead the industry rather than simply report on what it was doing, if you know what I mean. And then, of course, that became even more important when we were in this awful period of fake news and people like Trump denigrating journalists. And it felt like the media and journalism in particular were under some kind of existential threat, that it was like the business model had disappeared. The trade had been denigrated for political reasons by certain leaders around the world, and then social media was eating our lunch and at the same time allowing kind of bullshit facts to be circulated willy-nilly. It really felt like that journalism was something worth standing up for. So that if that makes sense, that's the answer to that question.
No, it certainly does. And if you look at journalism as a whole, what do you think is the best defense against these spurious accusations of fake news and the denigration, which certainly came, loud and clear from Trump?
Well, I think we're in a much better place now in the world now that Trump's gone. To be honest, it feels like we've all breathed a collective sigh of relief. And then also, Dezeen has been through a really important change in the last few weeks, because we've sold the company to a Danish media group, and that's been a very interesting journey as well, because the JP Politikens, who's the company that's bought us, has a really strong journalistic ethos. It's owned by two trusts that believe in the importance of journalism for democracy. And so when I first started having a conversation with them, the conversation was along the lines of journalism is important for democracy, but you can only have good journalism if you have a good business model behind the journalism. And that's not easy these days, but Dezeen, as it happened, had kind of figured it out. So the answer to the question, how do we preserve journalism in the face of all these threats, is like, come up with a way of doing good journalism that makes a profit, is the sort of the answer, which is fiendishly difficult to do. But we now have a parent that believes in that and has acquired us because that's what we've been doing for 15 years.
For businesses and people considering or considering launching a new brand from scratch, as you did back in 2006, do you have any kind of words of wisdom, any key do's and don'ts?
Um, well, yes. I mean, I suppose that the way I've done it is not the typical way to do it at all. It's not. There's no. It
In what
wouldn't. It
way?
would. Well, usually you would, I suppose, write a business plan, do some research into the sector, get some investment. I didn't do any of those kind of things. I mean, I was forced into it, as I explained, because I got fired from my job. But I think that the thing that is true for anyone who starts a business is do something that you believe in and that you know about. I mean, it's so much easier to launch a business in a field where you already know the people, you know how it works, you've got some kind of you've got relationships with people, rather than going into something you've never heard of because you think it's a bit of a gold rush. Um, and also that when you're putting in those hours, day after day with no financial payback, either that day or on the horizon, if it's something that you really love doing, it's like you'll take that pain on the chin. It doesn't matter. Like it's sort of, you can just convince yourself that it's your hobby rather than your business. So to doing something in an area that you know and love is definitely a good idea, I would say.
And looking back on your 15 years, would you have done anything different with the benefit of hindsight?
Yeah, I think probably would have been a good idea to have got some investment, because it probably would have been able to move much quicker. And I think the single thing I would have changed is I would have got a salesperson or a sales team on board quicker. I think it took 3 years before I hired a salesperson. I was doing all the sales myself to start with. And then suddenly, like, sitting next to someone who was just on the phone all the time saying, trying to persuade people to part with money and emailing dozens of people, just thinking, like, why didn't I do this earlier? I could have saved myself so much pain, and it would have allowed me to focus on what I'm good at, which is the journalism and brand building side of things. And I became quite good at the technology side of things as well. But the sales thing's never been my strong point, and there are lots of brilliant people out there who should have got on board earlier.
Well, it seems that sales is one area where, obviously it's vital for all publishers, but some struggle with it. I mean, from what you've seen of salesmen you've employed, what are the skills which make that a good salesman stand out, or person, I should say,
Salesperson.
salesperson? Yes.
Well, like all kinds of things. But first of all, you have to have a product that's worth selling. I mean, that's like that's absolutely key to it. So you have to have things that people want to buy at a price that people are um, willing to engage with your offering. And then, I mean, personally, for me, we want salespeople who just people that you can spend time with in an office and have enjoy traveling with, and so on and so forth. I think that not just salespeople, but all members, when you're building a company, you want people who you can get on with and admire and have a falling out with, but it not lead to bitter recriminations. So those are qualities. When we interview people, no matter what role it's for, one of the questions we ask ourselves, not out loud but quietly to ourselves, is this a Dezeen person? Is this the kind of person that we wouldn't get annoyed with, or we wouldn't find their music taste or something a bit kind of annoying? Do they fit in? So that's really important as well, I think, as well as their kind of skill set. Most people can be taught the skills that they need. Most people are able to kind of to learn the gaps in their knowledge, but personality is really important, I think.
Okay. The this year has obviously been the year of the pandemic since March last year. What things have Dezeen done differently as a result of COVID-19?
Oh my God! But I mean, this year's been absolute roller coaster. So 1 year ago now, we were all in lockdown, and I mean, we were looking at our business model collapsing around us. I mean, there were weeks in March and April last year when no money was coming in whatsoever. I mean, a lot of our business is based on events. So, doing videos at design events, talks for brands, advertising around product launches, which happen at design fairs. We have a recruitment advertising business. Of course, no one was recruiting. I mean, we really thought we weren't going to see the summer out, let alone the year. So we were staring down the barrel of a very large gun. But what we decided to do was we just thought, if there are no events in the design world and architecture world, people aren't able to go to Milan or whatever the next fair is, why don't we do our own one? So we came up with the idea of doing a virtual design fair on our website, in the hope that people would spend their marketing budgets with us rather than at the events they would have gone to. And miraculously, it worked. We came up with something that we were first out of the starting blocks with a digital festival. People really enjoyed it. It brought people together during those dark days of the first lockdown. Got tons of press out of it, and we came up with all these new digital-only business ideas, which have now become part of our portfolio, or are becoming part of our portfolio. So we really pivoted the entire business in the course of several weeks from our spare bedrooms. It was like starting the company all over again, to be honest. Like, being back at home again. I wasn't on my own because there were 25, 26 other people dotted around the place, but you couldn't see any of them.
And this virtual fair, presumably you didn't have a platform, you'd never done one before. How quickly did you turn that round? And looking back on it, what were the pluses and minuses? What did you do well, and what, looking back on it, didn't go quite so well?
Well, we came up with the idea. Okay, what didn't go well was we managed to offend all of Italy by the big design fair in our world takes place in Milan each April, the Salone del Mobile, the International Furniture Fair, and that got cancelled obviously because of the pandemic. And that was the big event that shook Dezeen, because we usually fly 20 people out to Milan. All of our video crew are there, all our journalists and everything like that. But we thought, well, let's do a digital version of Milan Design Week. So we came up with the idea, I think, on a Wednesday at virtualmilan.com. We announced it on Thursday. By Friday, lots of Italian social media people were saying, what the hell do you think you're doing? You're taking advantage of our misery during the pandemic, you vultures. So by Friday, we changed it to Virtual Design Festival. But then we still got an onslaught of bad publicity from Italy, which was like an absolute disaster on top of a disaster. It was the single worst moment in my entire professional life.
And they were offended. I can see why they might have been offended by Virtual Milan, but once you changed your name, they were still upset.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, it didn't go down. Still didn't go down very well. But we bided our time for a couple of weeks just to see whether, because there was still talk that the Milan fair might happen later in the year. So we didn't want to be accused of treading on any toes again. And then we waited, and about 2 weeks after we'd made our first announcement, the Milan Furniture Fair announced that it was cancelled for the year. So then we went live with our announcement. The incubation period was 2 weeks, and then I think we started the festival 2 weeks after that. So we were up and running within 4 weeks of having the idea, and that festival ran for 3 months in the end. We kept extending it because it was
fantastic.
Successful.
And with the Italians on board?
Yeah, I think we managed to mend lots of the bridges. Yeah, we definitely reached out to Italy and been very apologetic. I mean, I wrote a first person apology for offending people. I mean, if you make a mistake, you should just fess up as quickly and as comprehensively as possible. So I think that's behind us now. Yeah, and it was so successful. Good. I mean, it was great. Actually, it was great to have something to get up in the morning for during those, really tough days. Do you remember back last March, April, May?
I do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the virtual design festival, is that going to be a recurring event for you now, even after the lockdown is over?
No, because what happened was we came up with all these ideas for. I mean, it was a festival in the sense there was lots of cultural content. Like every day we did collaborations with museums, and we did live interviews, and we did music performances. We really explored what you could do digitally with a limited number of tools, i.e. a WordPress blog, Zoom, YouTube, social media. And the tools at our disposal were really basic, actually. And then we also came up with a whole bunch of revenue generating ideas. So, for example, we knew that none of the design and architecture schools could have their graduation shows because of the pandemic. So we offered a platform where they could do that virtually. It was paid for, but it was very, very affordable. We launched a digital version of a design show, so brands could pay to put their products in a special section of this site. And it was all a blog. There was no sort of 3D fly-throughs or VR or anything like that. It was just pictures and text. That proved very successful. We came up with a series of we came up with a way of doing video virtually, so through Zoom or through working with local crews around the world. So we came up with a kind of an entire video offering that didn't involve travel, which has been very successful. So with all of these services and a few others, we've spent the rest of the time since the summer turning them into permanent services, which we've kind of done all of them now, apart from one, which is we're taking on an additional office space to create a dedicated video studio, which we're about to sign the lease on. So we're not going to do Virtual Design Festival again, but its legacy lives on because all of the paid for services that we came up with are now part of our stable of services.
So I mean, that's fantastic. So really, if you look out, in years to come, when you look back at the pandemic, despite the initial panic and the worries about the very existence of the business, it led to a number of innovations which will be with you for many years to come.
Yeah, it's absolutely, yeah.
Excellent. Now, you've written a book. In fact, I think you've written a number of books, but one book in particular was called 21st Century Design, and that looks at design icons. Can you give us some idea of your own design preferences by maybe taking a couple of your favorites and telling us what's special about them?
Sure. Well, the first thing says that book, 21st Century Design, is the thing that got me fired because I hadn't told my bosses at my previous job that I was working on it. And
it's funny. I didn't want to ask you why you were fired, but that's good to know.
I thought it was best to keep it quiet in case they caused a problem. I thought I'd wait till it came out and then show it to them. It was as a fait accompli, but they got really upset, and it led to my dismissal. But also, I was commissioned to write a book called 21st Century Design, and it was published in 2006. But there hadn't been much 21st century design to write about by that point, to be honest. So looking back on that book, it was it kind of captured the zeitgeist of what was happening at the beginning of the 21st century, and a few things stand out and are still relevant. One is a massive return to decoration in design, which the 20th century was dominated by modernism, which was pretty much dedicated to getting rid of ornaments and unnecessary color and decoration and stuff. That started to come back in the 21st century. The return of interest in craft, which is still with us. Technology was starting to become a big influence, not just as a tool to create architecture and design, but as a vehicle for expression in itself. Like buildings started to look like pixels, or buildings started to look like, curves on a computer screen. And then probably most importantly, the rise of the environmental agenda. So looking back on that book, I'm not sure that there are that many buildings or objects that stand the test of time, to be honest, that would count among my greatest design moments of the 21st century, now that we're sort of 1/5 of the way through it. But I think the book definitely did point to some fairly major changes of emphasis that the whole design world was going through and is still going through.
Over the years, the Dezeen site has been described as seductive and a beautiful place to spend time. How have you managed to achieve this, and what are the design imperatives that you put into your own site?
Yeah, well, it's a design website, so goes without saying that it has to be beautifully designed. We're lucky, obviously, because architecture and design tends to look nice. So visually, that gives us a head start over lots of other sectors where you don't have such nice visual material to work with. Also, though, when you combine the visuals of the content with the aesthetic aspects of journalism, i.e., like, headlines that are well crafted and proper good intelligent paragraphing and pull quotes and all of that furniture stuff, and then the kind of the UX stuff of making it really obvious where people should click, and making it as clean as possible and as minimal as possible. Together with working with a great art director, we work with Misha Weidman, who's a Swiss typographer, which I love the idea of working with someone who's from a classic, type on paper kind of background. Who's, we work obsessively to have endless conversations about everything. Like, can we make it simpler? Can we make it simpler? Dezeen has one headline font and one body copy font, just like things that most people wouldn't even notice, that are obsessively thought through. We spend weeks and weeks and weeks talking about things like this. That all of that combined, hopefully, I think it's demonstrated that that's quite an appealing package. It looks nice, is easy to find your way around, so people keep coming back. Simple as
And
that,
over the
really.
years, over the 15 years, have you had any major redesigns, any major changes of fonts or anything like that, where you've thought, well, we've been doing it this way for the last 5 years, let's do it a completely different way, or has it just evolved gently over the time?
So when I started Dezeen, obviously, like, on my own with no help from anyone apart from my friend Alex Wiltshire, who set up WordPress for me, went round to his flat and we set it up in like 2 hours, I think, over a couple of glasses of wine. So initially, the design of Dezeen was almost deliberately bad. The fonts, I used Courier, the typewriter fonts, because I thought that was quite funny, like a design website that used like a really basic font. But I thought that was kind of quite evocative of me at home, like just tapping away on my keyboard with 2 fingers. And then I met Misha Weidman, the typographer I was talking about, very early on through one of these commercial projects that came up. Actually, the Design Museum in London saw my blog and said, could you run the blog for this Zaha Hadid exhibition we're doing? And by the way, we've got this great young graphic designer to design the blog for us. And they showed me the design of the blog that they were doing. And it was like, that was the best looking blog I'd ever seen. So I immediately got in touch with them and said, can you do Dezeen for me? And so in 2000 and summer of 2004, so Dezeen was 6-7 months old, Misha designed that logo for us, the kind of lopsided Dezeen logo, and chose the font, Accidents Grotesque, which is our headline font, and did a layout for us, which we launched, I think, in September 2004. Sorry, what am I talking about? 2007, which has been with us ever since. And we have, in the intervening years, had conversations and even spent amounts of money that I wince to think about with other design studios to change it up, like, give us something new, we want to move on. But in the end, we've always gone back to Misha. We've always thrown away what other studios have given us, and we've kind of got the same the same design outlook as we had in 2007.
Well,
Obviously,
that's a huge compliment to her, isn't it?
yeah. I mean, his design has really stood the
Oh,
test
his,
of
sorry.
it's
Yeah.
really stood the test of time. It's evolved, but it's also kind of, it's very interesting that if you think back to 2006 when Dezeen started, Twitter had just launched like a few weeks before. Facebook didn't exist, Instagram didn't exist. I think YouTube started around exactly the same time. There were no iPhones. You think how much change there's been in the digital world since then. Yet Dezeen, it looks more. It doesn't look the same because we've gone from a 3-column grid to a 2-column grid. Obviously, the change in banner ad sizes has driven a lot of layout changes and things like that. But you would recognize the two sites side by side. You would know that they're the same thing, even 14 years apart, which is kind of really extraordinary, I think.
I think that's very refreshing because I think some publishers do tend to kind of go for a redesign, almost as a matter of course. But if you don't need to, and you've got the right fonts, why bother?
Yeah, and also, as I said, we worked with really trendy web design studios, um, thinking they would come up with something better, and there was always like some fairly fundamental wrong thinking in what they gave us. It looked very nice, but we just knew it wouldn't work. We know how our audience navigates our site. We know how they flow through it. We know what they're interested in, and Misha is like intuitively understands that as well, and also is very proud of the way that we've looked after his brand. To be honest, I mean, it's he's given us this this kit of parts that can endlessly be reconfigured and extended. And our branding strategy is just put another word after Dezeen. So Dezeen Jobs, uh, Dezeen Talks, Dezeen Studio. For a while, we had Dezeen Watch Store. It's very kind of like Lego-like building blocks of branding strategy, but we haven't run out of road of that yet on that yet.
Well, that leads me nicely to the next question about revenue models. What are the trends in? Well, where do you make your money, and what are the trends in that?
So the obviously the first type of revenue I got was advertising, and the second type of revenue I got almost around the same time was branded content. I mean, I didn't know it was we didn't call it branded content then, but that's what it was, like creating content for brands basically that looked like content rather than advertising. And all of the media that was talking about digital media was always saying that online advertising revenue was going to go downhill, that rates, CPM rates were going to decline. Don't build a business strategy on advertising. So kind of went out of our way to come up with as many different revenue streams as we could, in the expectation that display advertising would collapse, which in fact it never did. It's still really strong for us. So display revenue is still our strongest earner. Second strongest earner is our studio. So we have our own in-house video team, and creative team that works with brands to produce videos for them, to do talks. We work like an agency, taking creative briefs from brands as well. And then we have our classified models, so we have our job site, which is a sort of pay to put an ad up kind of thing. And the classified offering is expanding now due to these new services that I was just mentioning that we developed during Virtual Design Service. So we have a service for schools where they can present their student work. We have a service for brands to present their products, which is called Dezeen Showroom. We've got a couple of other ideas for classified offerings as well. And then actually the one I haven't mentioned at all throughout this talk is our awards program. We launched an awards program 4 years ago, which is a pay to enter. It's very cheap for people to enter, but so it's sort of like the goal is to get as many entries as possible. But that's been unbelievably successful. We had over 4,000 entries even last year during the pandemic, and so far entries this year are like 50% up on last year so far. It's quite early in our entry period. But so we have like 6 or 7 different revenue streams. The idea is that when some of them aren't doing well, others will be doing well. So we're kind of hedging our bets. That's how we do it.
And at the recent takeover announcement, which I think just was earlier this month, you said that the acquisition will help further your ambitious growth plans. And JP Politiken described the business as having plenty of what they called unrealized potential. Where do you see the future opportunities for Dezeen?
Oh my God! I mean, we fall over ourselves with ideas of what we can do, and I suppose that in terms of the business story, the audience story of Dezeen is really simple. It's grown every year for 15 years. Like, there hasn't been a year when we haven't grown audience, we haven't grown social media, we haven't grown newsletter subscribers. Business-wise, it's been a bit more of a complex story because in 2019, our sector got really badly hit by Brexit worries. So we saw our first ever decline in revenue in 2019. We came into 2020 beginning of last year thinking, right, we're back on track. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. So we took another hit. So that really clipped our wings, actually, because we had big plans to expand into the US. We had an office in New York, an editorial office in New York, which we had to close last year as a cost-saving measure. We had plans to move into China. We were about to sign a joint venture with a Chinese partner to build up our awards program in China and our WeChat presence. We had all these other ideas which we had to sort of put on ice. But now, 2021, we're dashing out of the blocks again, and feel like confident to kind of roll out all of those ideas that we had to hold back on. So in terms of our growth plans, we already had them. We had to put them on ice for a couple of years. And when the conversation with JP about an acquisition got serious, we just showed them our business plan. We had to do a bit more work on it, like firm up the numbers a bit and things like that. But they've bought into a journey that we were already embarked on. They will be like a big brother holding our hands and helping us in sticky situations. But they don't need to inject cash into us. That's already accounted for through, we're entirely revenue funded. So the acquisition is gives Dezeen a sort of safe harbor for the future. It allows the brand to continue long after I've gone, which is I wanted to leave Dezeen in a strong place, to not be reliant on me. It's a very good partner in terms of ethical outlook and, as I was saying, diversity and attitudes to climate change and things like that. And also, my partner and I, we've been able to take some cash out of the business to reward us for 15 years of
Lovely.
all back-breaking work. So don't have any embarrassment about that at all.
No, why not? Well, every business owner aspires to it. So congratulations.
Thank you.
When you look at the wider B2B publishing sector, where do you think publishers should be focusing their energies in the next few years?
I mean, I don't know. It's not like there's any one route. I mean, our route has always been ideas driven. I mean, maybe too many ideas. We like to try things out. We like to build things to see what happens. Our business model is like based on the MVP model, the minimum viable products. Like, we think we can launch a recruitment business. How cheaply can we get something up that will establish whether it's possible or not? I mean, honestly, we sometimes launch revenue services for like the low hundreds of pounds. And you soon find out whether there's an appetite for that. And then if it doesn't work, you haven't lost very much. And if it does work, then you can feel confident to invest a bit of cash in development and branding and people.
So what's your win-lose ratio then on these MVPs?
Pretty high, actually. Pretty high. I mean, most of them have worked. We did try e-commerce. We had a watch store for a while, which lasted about 5 years and just became too much of a distraction. So we're not sentimental at all. We're more than happy to kill something off if it's not working. But to go back to your question about what the future is, our new parent company in Denmark has a subscription model. 80% of their revenue comes from subscription, just 20% from advertising, and that's flipped from 2080 in the last few years. They strongly believe that getting people to pay subscriptions to particularly B2B media is the future, and we kind of feel that will definitely be a part of our future as well. We're not going to slap a paywall or even a freemium wall on our content anytime soon, but we do think there's a big opportunity for us there to kind of create some kind of paying model whereby people get something beyond what everyone else gets on the website. And in fact, we've just announced a thing called Dezeen Club. So what we've done is bundled together the idea of a social club with the idea of a subscription model, called it a club. and we just stuck that out there to see what will happen. And we're going to have a virtual gathering in a couple of weeks' time to test that. So that's our minimum viable product model. Let's see what happens if we tell everyone we're launching a membership club and have an event, and see how it works out. So we'll know a bit more about how it works out in a couple of weeks' time. But it seems to be going really well, because the thinking behind it is that in these pandemic times, and even post-pandemic times, I don't think we're going to be going back to how it was before anytime soon. I don't think thousands of people are going to be flying out to cram into a convention centre somewhere in the world anytime soon. The digital realm can do most of the things that the real world can do, apart from the social. That's what people are missing. They're missing hanging out with their friends. They're missing chance encounters. They're missing having some drinks and having a bit of a natter and a gossip. So we're experimenting ways of allowing people to do that through their computers virtually. That's the kind of the club part of our membership ambition.
And see where it goes from there.
Exactly.
Well,
yeah,
good luck.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Finally, Marcus, outside of work, a question we ask all our guests, outside of work, how do you relax?
Well, I do love working. I suppose most entrepreneurs would say the same thing. So I do really enjoy looking after Dezeen, and I spend a lot of time, editing comments and creating tags and things like that. But when I'm not doing Dezeen stuff, I love gardening. I'm not very good at gardening, but I love tinkering around with plants. I love walking, and I love making music. My alternative career would have been a composer, so I spend a lot of time making audio recordings and composing music.
Oh, so what kind of music would you compose if you had the chance?
Oh, all kinds, really. Yeah, I kind of have got lots of ballady songs and rock and some kind of club tracks and things like that. Just sort of a bit all over the place, to be honest. But always very melody driven, like tunes.
And will any of them ever see the light of day?
Oh yeah,
outside of your own four walls.
Yeah. I've definitely decided I'm going to complete all of my tracks at some point. I'm going to get them mastered and release them somehow, not in any expectation of success, but just so that they're in the world somehow. But I'm unbelievable. I have no shyness whatsoever as a journalist. It's very weird. I can go up to Kanye West at a garden party and ask him a question, but I'm absolutely terrified of the idea of singing in public. It's very, I don't really understand it. Yeah.
Is that because you don't think you got a good voice, or because you're just shy in that regard?
I don't really know. I think I have got quite a good voice, but it's just one of those things, isn't it? So I will put my music out there probably under some kind of pseudonym. I mean, I don't mean probably. I mean definitely. I've got my music brand sorted out. I just need to get the music finished.
Well, I was about to say we'll look forward to that, but of course we won't know when it's happened, will we? So.
Unless it's a massive success, and then I'll unmask myself as the guy behind this, this strange music brand.
Well, I look forward to hearing that. Marcus Fares, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you for speaking to me.
We would like to thank Advantage CS again for sponsoring this podcast. Advantage CS has been developing subscription management solutions for the information industry since 1979. The comprehensive functionality, adaptability, and scalability of its software helps leading publishers around the world manage their businesses more effectively. Find out more at advantagecs.com. Many thanks to Marcus for giving us such a fascinating insight into his business. I loved the emphasis on high standards, even in the early days when resources were tight. And I look forward to the release of Marcus's first album, even though it sounds like we won't know it's him until well after the event. If you want to know more about Dezeen, then check out their website at dezeen.com. Marcus is also active on Twitter, where his handle is @MarcusFares. If you're interested in reading the book that got Marcus fired, then 21st Century Design is available on Amazon. Thank you for listening, and do join me in 2 weeks' time for another In Publishing podcast. Bye for now.